Hello everyone, this is Farhan and VU2 Echo Sugar Echo, and I'm going to now show you how to assemble the sBitx basic kit. So sBitx basic kit uh, is essentially uh, a full sBitx, except that the Raspberry Pi and the display are missing. So you have to basically get your own Raspberry Pi display and your own Raspberry Pi 4 with at least 2 GB RAM. So this is how it will appear, and on the front of the pack there is a small pouch with a lot of components, and that you have to be very careful about and take it out. So here is the entire thing. As you will see, that what's missing here is the display and the Raspberry Pi inside it. So now I'm going to unpack this. Okay, unpack much easier I thought it would be. It's a powder coated box, and the main thing here is to retrieve this and first take out the wire which comes with this, which is meant for supplying power to the Raspberry Pi display. So let's do that first and get that out of the way. The Raspberry Pi display, let me take this out here, is a little delicate. I have spoiled a couple of them by bending these away. So be a little careful when you're using this. And what you need to do here is that on this particular connector here, there you have to supply this with 5 volts power supply, which will come from the digital board on the sBitx itself. So here is ground and here is the 5 volts pin. These two have to be connected with the supplied wire. Now the important thing here, and let me just come very close in here, is that the brown part here, okay, let me just see if I can get this. The brown wire has to go to 5 volts. Okay, let me see if I can get the thing a little more clearer. It's not coming in, but anyway, I can actually show it to you probably here. That's the 5 volts and the ground, right? So the 5 volts has to go to the brown, and the black has to go to the ground. This is very important, because if you miss doing this and you put it in reverse, you can just blow up the display, and I think the display is the costliest of all the components on the sBitx. There, we are done. So with this, you're ready with the display. You can keep this away. So here is the Raspberry Pi, and you would have found this strip inside the display's packing. There are two sides to this, right? There's a blue and there is a silver side, and the blue has to go this way. That's the white side actually faces towards the Raspberry Pi, and the blue faces away from the Raspberry Pi. So the way to do it is, there's a small black thing here which goes in like that. So you just pull this out and then insert the cable so that it sits in firmly there, and then you press these two in. Both of them go down. So now it's firm. You can tug it slightly to see that it's done properly, right? So with this, the prep for both the Raspberry Pi and the display is over, and now we will open up the front panel of the sBitx and install these two inside it. So all you need to do now is to just take out the front panel, and the front panel is taken out by 2 screws on the top and the 2 screws on the bottom. And it's always a good idea to have a largish star screwdriver to do that. These screws run away, so I usually keep them in a tin box here. Let me just take a lid out of this one. Let me push it out a little with the help of a screwdriver. Yeah, okay, it's out now. Okay, so you have to install the display here, and to do that, now the orientation is important, and this goes to the bottom of the display. This goes to the bottom of the display, so that's what you have to remember. So this is how it will go in. You route the power cable through the opening in the middle and basically keep it here. Have something soft to put it down up against, and now you'll see that these holes, the mounting holes, align up in these places, and you have these smaller of these screws here. So you see these small ones are the ones that you need here. You see these small ones, these ones, right? And the bigger ones are actually to mount the Raspberry Pi. So I'm just going to take the small ones out. And keep the larger ones, which are regular M3 screws. Rather, these are the M2.5 screws for the Raspberry Pi up here. And it's actually, when seating the screws, easier to just hold this in your hand and then guide the screws in. You will have to use a slightly smaller star head driver. Do not tighten them too tightly. In fact, it's a good idea to never tighten the screws too tightly. Usually, if you tighten one screw too much, it fails to align itself properly, and that actually creates a problem later on. Okay. And then the last screw. So with this, you have installed the display. There's a protective cover here. It's best not to take it out. The one thing that we left out to do with the Raspberry Pi itself was to insert the SD card, and the SD card will also come to you in these. So that's the SD card. It has the entire operating system and all the software on that, and there is usually a serial number also written on this. And this has to be installed such that when you turn this back, you can still see the written part of the SD card on the top side. That's it. It has to fit in snugly. If it sort of softly clicks inside when you're putting it in, but that's all there is to it. Okay, so we are done with this, and now we need to install the Raspberry Pi on top of this, right, like that. So now you have some more screws here, which you will use to install the Raspberry Pi on top of it. Now there are actually two screws, one's with flat heads and one with the round heads, and the round head screws are the ones that you need here. Off here. Okay. So these are the 4 screws. These are very small screws, and it's very easy to drop them. I have butterfingers, so I'm always a little careful about doing that. So now the Raspberry Pi is also all installed here. And next we will put the front panel back on, and then open it from the top to make the connections between the Raspberry Pis, between the display cable Raspberry Pi, the power supply and the Raspberry Pi, and the encoder back to the digital display. So first we'll put this back now. And while putting this back, it's very important to do 2 things. One is that this often has a tendency to go off on these sides. So this has to actually be wrapped back here and hold it that way when you're actually installing this, the front panel. And then you just snap the front panel slowly into this. Be a little careful about these holes, as I had warned you earlier as well. One way to make it easier is to loosen these mounting blocks from the side. Larger screws back onto the front panel. Okay, so we are done with this. Next we are going to open the top panel, and then we are going to um, connect up the cables, and that would be the end of our assembly of the basic kit. So I've just removed these 4 screws, and you can use some sort of a plier or something to gently remove this. Don't insert something which is sharp and too long, because it might go and destroy the diaphragm of the speaker. The speaker is right here. So I'm just going to disconnect the speaker as well. The next critical thing really is to get this installed again, into this connector here, the display. The tricky part is that this needs to be twisted around. This needs to be twisted around, right? This needs to be twisted around that way, and then it has to go inside. So that's actually a little tricky, and I'll just change the camera position so that you can actually see this easier. So I'll keep this tilted a little so that you can have a better view of what I'm doing here. So first thing that you do here is use a small screwdriver or something to push this black small stuff, which is exactly the same as the one that we saw on Raspberry Pi, out so that it opens. I usually can manage to do this with my fingernails. For me, this actually is the trickiest part of getting this thing done. Don't push it out with too much power, because if it completely comes out of the PCB, then it's going to be a problem for you. So I'm going to push this back again to show you how it looks when it's pushed in. So now you see that it's completely inside, and then I push it out there and there. So now you can see that it's out, and the critical thing is that this needs to be twisted while not breaking the ribbon at all. Okay, so what we do is that we sort of align it up there and then gently coax it to get to its place. It's not too difficult, but it needs a little bit of work. There, one side has gone in, and now the other side is also gone in there. So now it's perfectly seated inside. The silver leaves were up, right? The silver stuff was pointing up. And now what you need to do is to close these back. Again, I'll use a tweezer to this is the encoder cable, which simply plugs in into the encoder slot here. And with this, actually, we are, and we can probably boot up to see how this works. So, okay, say a prayer, and you switch this on. And we wait for the display to come up. The display is working, and the next thing that we see here is the Raspberry Pi screen. So it's all good and it's working. There we are. We'll just switch this back off now, because we have not installed the top panel with the speaker. So the speaker is a 3-pin connector. It's not that because it's stereo, but just because you shouldn't confuse the speaker with the power line going to the display. So that this plugs in here. and then use the screws that we had removed earlier. So that's the assembly of the sBitx, and now you are ready to start using it. Thank you very much.